I think the pandemic will change everything. I think it will change politics. I think it will change people's expectations about work, about health, about our own communities and what we expect from each other in our communities.
Are we due a new social contract? My guest today argues that as the social divide increases, it's time to rethink how we relate to one another. Baroness Nemat Shafik has held positions at the IMF, the World Bank and the Bank of England, and she's now chair of the London School of Economics. In her book, What We Owe Each Other, she says we should draw up a new social contract that covers everything from the welfare state to parenting to the generational divide. Hi, Minouche. Thank you so much for joining us. It's a bit of a fangirl moment for me, frankly, because I've been following your story for a while.
It's a pleasure to meet you.
So I wanted to kind of start by talking about your book. You and your former colleague, Mark Carney, both released books at the same time. And there was a review of both of them at the same time, which pointed out that when a former governor and a former deputy governor of the Bank of England simultaneously published books arguing there's something profoundly wrong with the economy, we should either be very comforted or very worried. Which should we be?
Well, I think the key is you have to pay attention. That's good. And I think, I think you need to be a little bit of both, because I think one needs to be worried because I think there's a sense that there's something wrong with our economic model. But I think you need to be comforted by the fact that a lot of people who are inside the system are asking the difficult questions and trying to figure out how to fix the problems.
You're director of the LSE, and you're the second LSE director to put forward a plan for comprehensive social change. And I feel like everyone asks you this, but I want to ask you as well. Were you inspired by William Beveridge? And do you hope that your plan will have the same impact?
Oh, I was definitely inspired by Beveridge. In fact, I've got his book right here on my bookshelf. And the story of the Beveridge report is an incredible one because it was, if you read it, the actual original report, it's pretty nerdy and pretty technical. But people were queuing up along the Kingsway to buy copies. And it was the most widely purchased government document of up until that time, because people understood that it was a fundamental reordering of the rights and responsibilities of citizens in the UK. And, if my book has a fraction of the impact of the Beveridge report, I'd be delighted.
I mean, that was released after the war. Do you think we have a kind of the same opportunity to change things as we did then? Post-pandemic? Yeah.
I think the pandemic will change everything. I think it will change politics. I think it will change people's expectations about work, about health, about our own communities and what we expect from each other in our communities. So I think this is one of those critical junctures. And if you look historically, sometimes when you have a critical juncture like this, there's an incredibly big piece of progressive reform, like the Beveridge report, like the New Deal in the US. Sometimes not a whole lot happens that's really transformative, like after the 2008 financial crisis. So it could go both ways. And I'm just hoping that my book nudges it in a slightly more ambitious direction.
How will we know which way it's going?
Well, I don't think we'll know quickly. I have to say, even though I say that the pandemic will change politics, if you think after the 2008 financial crisis, the populist backlash to that didn't actually occur straight away. It took a few years to emerge as people felt like not enough had been done, and the people felt disempowered, frustrated, disappointed in the opportunities that their lives had given them, and also a sense that that elites had stopped listening and had kind of sheltered themselves and taken a disproportionate share of everything in our societies. And so it took a while, and I think we're still in the pandemic. And so I don't expect the kind of disruptive transformational change for a while. I think there's some interesting signs that people want something different. You see it in some of the polling. You see it in things like the recent decision that was taken around corporate taxation and the idea that people expected companies to pay tax in the communities in which they operate, not in some distant tax haven. You see it in the Supreme Court decision that Uber drivers are employees, and a sense that it's not fair that so many workers in the gig economy don't get benefits. And that had huge consequences during COVID. So you see it in the attitude to the current debate on health and social care. So I see indications, but I don't think we're there yet.
At what point during the pandemic did you feel like it was this kind of critical juncture?
Well, interestingly enough, I had started the book before the pandemic, and it was partly in response to the kind of wave of populist politics across the world. And I just wanted to understand, why are people so angry? Why are they so disappointed? And how do we address that and reduce the kind of polarization in our societies? And then the pandemic came, and my first reaction was, oh my God, I've got to rewrite this book now. But I realized that actually the pandemic just revealed those fractures in our societies even more. Who took the biggest hit? Precarious workers, people who had vulnerabilities, women, older people. I mean, in many ways, all those fractures in our society were revealed even more by the pandemic.
You do mention in the book the rise of populism, the backlash against globalization and technology, the aftermath of the financial crisis, the pandemic, culture wars, and protests around climate change. You said those are the kind of bellwethers. Are we experiencing more of that now than we did 20, 30 years ago? Is that kind of rage rising up?
Well, I think that rage reflects many things. I think it reflects the fact that many risks which we used to share with families, communities, or with the rest of society are now being borne by individuals. So if you lose your job, or if you have to think about how you're going to support yourself in old age, your pension, it's your individual responsibility. You've got a pension pot, you've got to sort it out yourself. Whereas the old social contract often meant that responsibility was shared, either in a defined, in a collective pension scheme. Similarly, with work, the risks around employment are now increasingly being borne by workers. A growing proportion of workers are in precarious work or flexible contracts or the gig economy, which means that the ups and downs of the labor market those risks are borne by individuals. And I think people are feeling the pressure of those individual risks, and that's fostered a huge sense of insecurity. I think the flip side is also, not just do people feel more insecure, but they feel that opportunities are not fairly distributed. And what's happened to inequality, to social mobility, to inequalities in wealth and inequalities of opportunity, and the inadequacies of meritocracy, I think have also been a big part of the backlash that we've seen.
So you're saying there's more inequality now? I mean, there's different scales, aren't there, really?
Definitely.
And some scales show more inequality, some show less. Where are you on that?
Yeah. So I think if you look at the UK evidence, inequality actually hasn't gotten that much worse in the UK because the wealthy took a big hit with the financial crisis in 2008. So income inequality has not gotten much worse. What's gotten much worse is wealth inequality. So things like assets, because of house prices, because of what's happened in the equity market. So wealth inequality has gotten much worse. And social mobility actually seems to have declined. So if you look at the data for the UK now, it takes about 5 generations to go from the bottom of the income distribution to the middle. And that's just too long.
Do you think, though, that there is more of a kind of a sense of inequality or increasing inequality than there is actually increasing inequality?
I mean, some people have argued that there's more awareness of these things because of social media, and things are just much more visible. I think more than the anger around inequality, it's more the fact that the opportunities that people face are just so unequal. And depending on which family you're born in or where you're born in the country is so determinant of your life chances. And I think that is deeply frustrating to everyone. And I think it's also deeply problematic for society as a whole, because there is so much talent that is being wasted around the world. One of the pieces of research that was done by colleagues here at the LSE and at Harvard were looked at something called Lost Einsteins. And it looked at children in the US who had exactly the same math and science skills in year 4 in school. And it showed that if you were born to a rich family, you were 10 times more likely to be an inventor and have a patent. Whereas if you were born into a poor family, that was not the case. And if you happened to be born in certain parts of the country, you were much more likely to be an inventor and have a patent. And the argument of this research is that if all those children who had the exact same maths and science skills, who happened to be born into a poor family or happened to be born into a poor part of the country, if we could tap into that talent, we could triple or quadruple the rate of invention and productivity in our economy. So we all lose by the lack of social mobility.
What I thought was quite interesting about your book, and that kind of reframed childcare for me a little bit, was that by failing to make any real provisions, the state's tacitly saying that kids are better off being cared for within the family and specifically by mothers. Is that something that's going to change? Is that an attitude that's going to change?
Well, I think it has to change for several reasons. First, because I think women are going to demand that it changes. Second, what a waste of talent that we have all of these educated women who are being told, you stay at home and take care of your child. You know, today, for the first time in history, if you look all over the world, more women than men graduate from university. And actually, they do a little bit better than men at university. And they graduate and they earn the same as men until they have their first child. And as soon as they have their first child, their incomes diverge, because at that point, women tend to move into more flexible part-time work, or they withdraw from the labor force altogether. And then when they try and come back, they never catch up because they have less experience, they get promoted more slowly, and so on. And so unless we provide a much better system of childcare, we will never be able to tap into all that female talent. And that is our loss. You know, the IMF estimates that GDP would go up by about 35% if we close the gender gap in the labor market. And especially as our society ages, we need those women in the workforce contributing to pension schemes to make our pension systems viable. And so I think we need a much better system, and we need to think about care as part of our social infrastructure. Just like we have an educational infrastructure and a healthcare infrastructure, we need a care infrastructure, because women can no longer take care of the young and the old for free.
I mean, one part of the book that made me laugh, really, was was it a Korean survey that said, we want to, but we won't?
Yes.
Which was talking about how the state had legislated to make paternity leave and to make men caring for children easier, but the attitudes were not there, the social attitudes. So how do you go about shifting those attitudes?
Yes, it's an amazing story, because in Korea now, if you're a man, you can get up to 2 years of paid paternity leave, and yet nobody takes it. It's an interesting contrast. If you look at Iceland had a different system. They said to families, we'll give 3 months for the woman, 3 months for the man, and 3 months which you can share between you, fully paid. But if the man doesn't take his 3 months, it's lost. And so they really incentivize men to take the paternity leave, because otherwise it would be lost completely. And that seems to have been quite effective at getting most men in Iceland to take paternity leave. I think the other message we need to get out is that there's a lot of evidence that babies who have fully engaged fathers do much better, do better academically, do better socially. And we need to get that message out so that I think more and more fathers will see that they have a really important role to play in childcare. And the other thing we can do, of course, is also provide better institutional environments for children to be cared for, including infants, and allowing both parents to go back to work and making it easy for them with the availability of affordable, high-quality childcare.
That would be lovely.
Wouldn't that be lovely? Wouldn't it be lovely? And I think in the UK we still have a reasonable level of fertility, but if you look at Japan, Korea, and in much of the continent, birth rates are really declining, and I think that shows that women have gone on fertility strike in those countries. And when you get into a dynamic where your population is declining, it creates huge problems for growth, for pension schemes, and for productivity. And so I think that is something to be avoided by providing good quality childcare to parents and families.
You talk about different types of society, you talk about the different countries. Which one has got it right?
Yeah, I often get asked this, and sort of the go-to answer is Denmark. Because they do many things right. First of all, they provide very good, high quality childcare. And as a consequence, in Denmark, most families are dual earner families, unlike in the continent and, say, in the UK, where most families have a primary earner and the woman is usually the secondary earner. And in Denmark, the rates of employment are very high. Most couples are able to continue to work even when their children are young. And moreover, they have very good benefits for all workers, including flexible workers who might be working under flexible part-time arrangements. But interestingly, they also have very flexible labor markets. So people, if they lose their job, they don't get severance. They don't even often get a notice period. And so employers are able to adjust their workforce when they need it. But that is not a problem because people, when they lose their jobs, they get a good level of unemployment insurance and very generous training. And so they're very quickly back in work. And so it's a model that combines flexibility, support to families, and finally, not surprisingly, when you look at what are called the happiness surveys, where they ask people, what is your subjective well-being on a 1 to 10 scale? Are you satisfied with your life? Guess which country always tops the charts? Denmark.
But it's quite an insular society, isn't it? It's not one that kind of welcomes outsiders massively.
Well, it's a very good point. They have had actually waves of immigration in recent periods, and that has been a source of tension. Mm-hmm. Because I think the way to think about immigration is it's letting others come into your social contract. And that's why the debate is often around things like benefits. If you're an immigrant, when are you entitled to benefits? When have you put enough into this society to be entitled to take the benefits that we all share? And navigating that adjustment of how immigrants are brought into the social contract has been tough and difficult politically.
I wanted to talk about the social care reforms that were announced. Do they kind of amount to the redrawing of the social contract? Should we all be very pleased about what Boris did, or are we a little bit more sceptical?
Well, I think we should be pleased that the difficult issue of social care is being tackled. So that's a step in the right direction. I think my criticism of it would be around the way it's being financed. One of the arguments I make in the book is that we tax capital too little and labor too much. And as a result, we increase inequality and we disincentivize job creation. If every time you hire a worker, you have 30-40% of additional costs above their wage that you have to pay in terms of national insurance and it disincentivizes you from creating jobs as an employer. And so the fact that this is being funded through national insurance, I think, is bad for job creation. So I would have preferred to see it funded through something else, through general income tax or through property taxes or some other tax. But having said that, I do think we need a system for social care. And so that's definitely a step in the right direction.
Thank you so much, Minouche. It's been an absolute joy to speak to you.
Pleasure. Thank you.